Masechet Moed Katan Daf Kaf Het. We'll cover the first Amud today, and we'll leave the second Amud and the very last a bit of a daf for tomorrow to even it out as some really fantastic agadot. We're starting off with some of the customs of burial for women, and that goes into a discussion of Miriam. And from there, we'll discuss different types of death at different ages and what they might symbolize. And we'll end off this Amud with 7 stories about sages and their deathbeds and some really fascinating lessons. So we begin Velo shel nashim le'olam mipnei hakabod. That generally for men, when there's a funeral procession carrying their body out, they would stop in the middle of the street and put it down, and people would say eulogies, and then they would may stop multiple times along the way. However, the Mishnah teaches that should be done for men, but not for women because of honor. What does that mean? In the rabbis of Nehardea said, this law of the Mishnah applies only to women in childbirth. Sadly, women often died in childbirth. And so you can imagine that this would be a lot of blood and bodily fluids. And so if difficult to clean up, if they would put the body down on the bier, on the stretcher, then these fluids would be leaking out, and it would be dishonorable for the deceased. And so therefore they would not do it for a woman who died in childbirth. But for other women who are healthy, so then they'll be the same as men. And yes, they would put the bodies down and pause and say eulogies, and everything would be the same. Okay, that's the rabbis of Nehardea. Rabbi Elazar amar afilu sharan nashim dichtiv v'tamot sham Miriam v'tikaber sham samuch lemita kebura. Rabbi Elazar, however, disagrees and says, no, the same is the law for all women. Who should be buried immediately and not stopping on the way. And we learned this from Miriam because it says she died there and they buried her there. In other words, they buried her right at the spot where she died. They did not move her to a different place. They did not stop on the way. They did not eulogize. And that would be kind of a general respect for bodies of women, not to leave it out. Remember, they didn't have coffins, so they're kind of just wrapping them in shrouds. And so it was felt that would be more respectful. I mean, it sounds from here like it was saying eulogies for women was more rare. We do have a couple of cases in the Talmud of rabbis giving eulogies for women. So it was definitely done in some cases, but just it was perhaps more rare than for men. Ve'amar Rabbi Elazar, af Miriam benishika meta. So Rabbi Elazar, the same sage, Rabbi Elazar, he says something else about Miriam, that she also died with a divine kiss. Sham mi Moshe. Moshe also says the word sham there. So what does it mean? So to die with a kiss for Moshe, it means that he died immediately without any pain or suffering. And just like Adam Harishon, God blew into their nostrils the breath of life, so too he took it out, sucked it out with a kiss. And just like a kiss feels pleasant, so too their death had no pain. It felt pleasant, and they died nice and comfortably. It only says it regarding Moshe, but the same is true for Miriam. The pasuk we learn it from regarding Moshe says Moshe died al pi Hashem. The pashat of that is based on God's word, right? Because God said so. This is it. Your time to go, and you can't go into the land. But literally, al pi, on the mouth of, means with a divine kiss. So even though it's the same is true for Miriam, the pasuk doesn't say it explicitly because it would be unseemly to say that. Obviously, it's a metaphor in any case. God did not kiss Moshe literally either, but the undertones that one might imagine by saying the words that God kissed a woman would not be appropriate, and therefore just as the word sham, and but the same type of death with love is the same. Since something else about it. Why does it come right after the paragraph of Paraduma? Paraduma is in Bimidbar Yud Tet. Death of Miriam is told in Bimidbar Perek Chaf. Why are they back to back? Just like the Paraduma brings atonement, really it brings tahara. If someone's tamemet, it brings them from tumah to tahara. But there's some correlation between them. Perhaps that's actually not the sprinkling, but the making of the paraduma. When one burns it, it is called a pad hachatat. And so therefore it is atoning, not for any specific person, but for general, for the community. And so just like the Parah Duma has an aspect of kapara, so too when a righteous person dies, that inspires people to think about their example and strive to be like them, and that brings atonement as well. Amar Rabbi El Azad, Lama nismecha mitat Aharon lebigdei kehuna. So a similar question in that same chapter in Bimidbar 20, here it says, right before Aharon is to die, Moshe removes his clothing, his bigdei kehuna, and he places it so that he can place it on Elazar, who's going to be the next Kohen Gadol. And so Moshe does exactly that. He takes it off of Aharon, puts it on Elazar, and then Pasuk 28, Vayamot Sham, Aharon Sham Berosh Shahad. So why is it talking about the clothing right at the same time? I mean, the simple answer is obvious. I have to take off his clothing so that we can inaugurate the next Kohen Gadol. But in a deeper sense, Ma bigdei kehuna mechaperin, af mitatan shel tzadikim mechaperet. Just like the clothing of the Kohen Gadol atone, so to the death of righteous people atone. How does the clothing of the Kohen Kohen atone? I think there's two senses. One, the simple one is that he's performing all the avodah, including chatat offerings and everything else, while he's wearing the bigdei kehuna. So the bigdei kehuna are necessary in order to bring kapara, just like you're saying, uniforms of police officers bring justice. It's not the uniforms themselves, but the actions that are done when they're wearing the uniforms. A deeper sense, however, is there is a midrash that talks about how each of the bigdei kehuna, this is good, relevant for Parashat HaShavua coincidence, Parashat Tisaveh. For example, the Choshen HaMishpat atones for sins done against justice, or the bells at the bottom of the me'il of the robe that make noise, that will atone for lashon hara, noise that people make in sin, and so on. So they might have specific symbolism, and this idea goes back to Philo, who writes about this very chapter and talks about the deep symbolism of each of the various types of Kohen Gadol, that the clothing themselves are a praklit, they are an intermediary pleading on behalf of Bnei Israel. Okay, so this has a lot of meaning, and so too the death of tzaddikim, their suffering and the death themselves, that is punishment, and if not punishment that's deserving by the tzaddik, then the tzaddik is suffering for the sins of the generation, and so therefore it too brings kapara. All right, Tenorabanan met pitom zohi mita hatufa. Okay, although we just said that Moshe, Miriam, they died this kiss of death, which without suffering. And nevertheless, it also has an opposite meaning. If someone dies suddenly, without any sickness, without any warning, zohi mita hatufa, that's called death by snatching. This person must have been liable to something that he got this immediately, this punishment. If a person is sick for one day and then he dies, that's a little bit less severe. It's called expedited death. This is like, we go to FedEx, right? Expedited delivery, or, depending on how serious the package is. Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel Omer, Zohi mitat magefa, shnemar ben adam hini lokech mechat machmad enecha b'magefa. A different opinion says a person is sick for one day and then dies, that is considered death through a disease, through a pandemic. And how do we know that? Because regarding Yechezkel, when Hashem says, listen, the love of your life, the life of your eyes is going to die, your wife, and she's going to die in a pandemic. And she's told that in the morning. And sure enough, that night, she dies at night. So she was sick for that one day. And I guess depending on what disease it is, this would be a pretty quick disease that would spread, and people would only last one day. Person gets sick for 2 days and dies, then that is a death that is quickened. It's a quick one. If it's for 3 days, then that is rebuke. In other words, this person did something not so bad. A person needed to be rebuked. And so it was able to survive for 3 days, and then gets the final rebuke. 4 days would be a reprimand. And Nazifa also sometimes refers to like a ban or excommunication. So this is a message from Kadosh Baruch Hu that they're not as bad as people that die more quickly, but somewhat bad. But standard death is after 5 days of sickness. As usual, someone gets sick for 5 days, they don't get better, so that's normal. That, in other words, that's kind of a natural death. The other ones are quicker, indicate some amount of punishment together with it. How do we know that the standard death is 5 days after 5 days of sickness? Because regarding Moshe, he was righteous. This gets a regular death, not because of any sin. It says there, hen, and hen is one. We're going to see because in Greek, the word hen, one, is the same. Karevu, today, that's a plural word. So that's 2 more. Yamecha is also plural, days. That's another 2 days. So 1, 2, and 2. Hachamisha is 5. Hen chad sheken b'lshon yavani korin lachat hen. Hen is considered one because in Greek, right, hen is in fact one, and so this is really interesting to make a play on words between the Hebrew word and its meaning in Greek. It does show, though, that the rabbis at least knew how to count to 1 in Greek. They probably knew a lot more than that. Met b'chamishim shana. Okay, so that was regarding how long a person is sick. Now, how about the number of years that one lives? If someone dies at 50 years old, zohi mitat karet, then that means that person deserved punishment of being life being cut off, and so that's a young age. Even though the life expectancy back then was like in the 40s, but that was average. Really, there was a lot of child mortality. And then if someone made it past childhood, they probably would live a long life. 60, 70 was regular. So on average, it was 40, but most people didn't actually die in their 40s, even when the life expectancy was 40. So even for back then, if someone made it past childhood and then died at 50, that was still considered to be dying young, and therefore that's called karet. 52, though, that's Shemuel Hanavi, who was from Ramah. He died at 52 years old. This is not explicit in Pesukim, but it can be calculated. And therefore Shemuel is righteous. So 52 can't be itself so bad if Shemuel lived till that long. Shishim zohi mitabid shamayim. 60 years old is death by the hands of heaven. So that's less severe than karet, but even 60, even for back then, was considered less than average. Amar Mor Zutra Maikera Dichtiv Tavo Bekelach Ele Kaber Bechelach Begematria Shitin Havu. And Yov says you will come to your grave in ripe age. So what does that mean? Bekelach Gematria 60. So there you go. 60 is saying you will die because of divine punishment. Rabbis probably translate this as as ripe age, but as explicit death because of a divine decree. Okay, so that's 50 and 60. 70, Shivim Seva. 70 is considered old age. That would be in line with average age expectancy back then for someone who was healthy and past childhood. Shimonim Geborot. 80 years old, then already we say that person has reached great strength. need a lot of strength to make it till that age. Based on the pasuk that days of our years are 70. If we're really strong, we can make it 80, right? And so on. Okay, so that's all one opinion. Rabba is now just adding something that between 50 and 60, not just 50 itself, but that whole range, that whole decade is called midat karet, right? And the reason why in this source over here, it doesn't say, it only says 50 and not 50 until 60, is in order not to imply anything negative about Shemuel, because Shemuel, who died at 52, we don't want to say he died because of karet. In fact, there's another Talmud that we saw in Masechet Ta'anit that said Shemuel died early so that he would not have to see the death of Shaul, who he coronated. And so he asked to die early, not to have a negative experience. So for Shemuel, it was not because he was deserving of karet, but for other people in general, that decade of 50 to 60 is associated with karet. You see from Shemuel that there are exceptions to this, right? Just if maybe you know someone who died young in his 50s, you shouldn't assume that it's because of this. We're going to see another exception here. Rav Yosef ki hava bar shitin avadahu yomat hava l'Rabbana. Rav Yosef, when he turned 60, he made a party for all the sages. He invited all his colleagues and friends. Aman nefaki li mikaret. I made it past the 50s, which would be associated with karet. So you see here, even Rav Yosef, who was a very righteous and he was blind, a sage, still was worried that who knows, maybe he made some mistake and could be liable to karet, and he was happy when he was not. Amala ben hitin fakle mor mikaret tishne. This is something very nice. Well, yeah, maybe you're out of the range of years for karet, but you can still deserve karet in terms of days. As we said before, if someone dies immediately without being sick, right, or sick only for a short time, then that also is considered a type of karet, a person being cut short without the warning of being sick for 5 days. But he said, well, at least you have something in your hand, half of it. At least you know you didn't get karet in years, karet in days that you still don't know. All right, so I'm not very kind of Abaye, I think, to say, well, who knows, you might still be deserving of karet, but I think he's joking with him. Rav Huna, he died immediately without being sick. And so the rabbi said, this is a bad sign. Does this mean he was deserving of karet? If someone dies without being sick, it dies immediately from something or other, then yeah, that would be karet. But that's only true if he didn't reach the age of 80, gevurot. If a person already reached 80 and then they die without any pain or suffering, but immediately, then that is actually mitat neshika, when that applies to Moshe, Miriam, Aharon also, and so that would apply to Rav Huna, who was already older, past 80, and therefore that's okay. So what you see here is that any one of these definitions isn't necessarily the definitive one, because there are multiple factors involved. Okay, and now we see another opinion that is completely different, the opposite of all the opinions we've said before. Amar Rava, this is something that's quite radical in context of what everything else in the Talmud says. It says the length of life, and the children one's going to have few or many children, and sustenance, if you're going to be rich or poor. All these three main things that people are concerned about in their lives are not dependent on merit. In other words, not dependent on if someone's righteous or not righteous, but rather they are dependent on mazal, on the constellation. In other words, it's based on astronomy, based luck. Literally, it's based on fate, the fates. and nothing to do with their righteousness. So they see this as a complete diametrically opposite of everything we said before. Before we were saying someone dies after not being sick or at a young age, that's because of some demerit. And Abba says no, it has nothing to do with merit or demerit. It's just luck of the draw. And he has a proof. Rabba in the fourth generation, and he's talking about his teachers, Rabba and Rav Chisda in the third generation. And he says, I know both of them. I knew both of them, and both are very righteous people. Were righteous people. They're greatest in their generation. Both of them, both this master could pray and bring rain, and the other master also could pray and bring rain. In other words, they were like miracle workers. Only the greatest of the righteous could have God's ear like that. And yet, even though they were both equally righteous, Rav Chisda lived for 92 years. Rabba lived less than half, only 40 years. In the house of Rav Chisda, he had 60 weddings. In the house of Rabba, they had 60 bereavements and mourning. 60 being a round number, because in Bavel they use base 60, so it's like us saying 100 or 1,000. So in other words, many weddings, many funerals. In the house of Rav Chisda, and I was referring to Mezoneh, right? We had Chayeh, how long they lived, Baneh, whether their children married or died, and their wealth. In the house of Rav Chisda, there was fine flour for the dogs. And even that, there was so left over that nobody even wanted. That's how much fine flour they had. In the house of Rabbah, however, all they had is barley bread for people. Usually back then, nowadays we think barley is, we pay extra for 5-grain bread. But back then, barley was only for animals, and humans had to eat it, and there was not even enough for humans to eat the barley bread. That's how poor Rabbah was. So there you go. That's the proof based on just a empirical test of these two rabbis and you can't say that Rabbah was deserving of karet or anything else, or anything that Rav Chisda was not deserving of. They were equally righteous, and they came to these two different conclusions. Okay, this is quite amazing that Rabbah said this. Rishonim have a hard time fitting this in with the rest of everything that says in the Talmud. Professor Elman, Lava Shalom, would often talk about this line and point out that Rabbah, who lived in Mechoza, in Bavel, and it was a important city. It was a suburb of Ctesiphon, the capital of the Persian Empire. So Rabbah knew a lot about his cultural surroundings, and there is a Persian Zoroastrian text that sounds just like this, that it lists a whole bunch of things, including these and a few others, and it says these are based on luck and not based on merit. And so you wonder if Rabbah maybe overheard that, thought about it, did his own research, and perhaps that's why he is the author of this outlying viewpoint. Another statement of Rabbah that also has the number 3. He says, I prayed for these three things from heaven. Three of them, two of them, I got. But one, my request was refused. To be as knowledgeable as Rav Huna, the greatest in the second generations, legendary, to be as rich as Rav Chisda. So this follows up on this story, Rav Chisda, and those were granted. Rabbah ended up being very wise and rich. But to have the humility of Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna, and that was not answered. Was not given that humility. Of course, only someone humble would say that he did not receive humility. You could imagine the opposite, right? I prayed for humility and I got it. Then he would not have gotten it. So actually, maybe this ironically proves the opposite, that he in fact was humble and did receive it. All right, Rav Seorim Achud Rava Havayatev Kamed Rava. Now we begin the first of the series of 7 stories about deathbed scenes. So Rava, the same Rava here, had a brother named Rav Seorim, And so he was sitting before Rava and he saw he sort of started dozing off, but not just a regular dozing off. He was on his deathbed and he was having his last breath. He was going to go soon. And Rava said to his brother, please speak to the angel of death and tell him, don't torture me. The brother Rav Seorim says, Rava, aren't you best friends with the angel of death? Shushbin is like the best man at a wedding, right? Says, you always converse with him. You are on good terms with him. Can't you ask him yourself? He says, no, once my mazal, so another reference to one's constellation that is guards over him. It says, since now that my constellation has been given over to the hands of the angel of death, he doesn't care about me anymore. And we were good friends for many years, but now I am in his hands. My fate is handed over to him, and so I have no special relationship anymore. So Rav Sorim also, he couldn't help there, and so Rav Sorim says, when you die, please come back and speak to me, right? Please appear to me in a dream. And sure enough, right? After Rava died, he appeared to his brother Rav Sorim in a dream. He says, was it painful when you died? It said it was like a prick of a knife of bloodletting. I guess we would compare that to an IV being stuck into your arm, right? So it's a pinch, but not very painful, very handleable. So it was not painful. Okay. Rava Havayatev Kamed Rav Nachman. Second story. Rava, well, this is not in chronological order, obviously, because Rava just died. So this is before that. Rava was sitting before Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman started dozing and he was about to die. So Rav Nachman says to Rava, please tell the angel of death not to torture me. He says, why would he torture? Aren't you an important person up in heaven? So you'll be okay. You'll get, you can do an easy pass line. You don't have to be tortured. Amar le man chashiv, man sefin, man arikiya. He says, who is honorable? Who's important? Who's honorable? Who is up high in the rakia or strong like the rakia? Who can say that they are important in front before heaven, right? So here, in this world, Rav Nachman's important, right? He was related to the exilarch, so he was rich and important. He says, down here, I could go in the business class line, but up in heaven, there's no favoritism. Amar le litchazi li mor. Rava said, when after you die, come visit me in a dream. So some people ask, isn't this Doresh el Hametim? Torah says you're not allowed to ask favors from the dead. You can't ask the dead, pray on my behalf, do this for me. All that is conjuring up the dead, which is necromancy. So isn't this the same? And so, well, maybe not, because they're asked now right now if he's alive. So he's asking while he's alive, listen, after you die, would you do me a favor? So perhaps this is allowed because it's not asking from the dead. They're not dead yet. And sure enough, Rav Nachman appeared to Rava in the dream. Rava asks, was it painful to die? This is not at all like removing a hair from milk, right? If I see a little hair, it falls in your cereal, so just go and remove it. Is that painful? It's not painful. It's nothing. However, even though it was very not painful at all, if Hashem would say, do you want to go back into the world, maybe a little longer, and then die again? I would not do it because I'm afraid of the angel of death. This time around it wasn't painful, but it's still a scary experience, and who knows what might happen next time around. So no, thank you. Rabbi Elazar havak achil teruma. Third story. It chazile. Rabbi Elazar, he was a kohen. He was in the middle of eating teruma. Angel of death appeared to him and says, "It's your time. Come with me." Amar le teruma kachil navelav kodesh yikre. He says, "Oh, can't you see what I'm doing? I'm in the middle of eating teruma. Teruma is sacred. I'm in the middle of a mitzvah here. Why? No, you can't take me now." So the angel of death said, "Okay, good point. Sorry to bother you while you're eating teruma." And once the angel of death passed, he went on to his next victim, and the Elazar was able to live for some time after. So sometimes, you just get away from that moment, and if you can survive that moment, then you may be okay for a while. Rav Sheshat was walking in the marketplace, in the shuk. Angel of death appears to him and says, "Come with me, it's your time." You're going to kill me in the marketplace like an animal? If you go to the shuk and you see the butcher stands, and right, you're just going to be like a piece of meat out here. This is not a respectful way to die. Come to my house, right? Give me a few minutes. Let me go to my house. Let me die in peace in my bed. Rav Asher, the angel of death, saw him also in the marketplace. Rav Asher says, "Please do me a favor. I want to review my studies one more time. I need 30 days. I need 30 days to review my Torah, and then I'll be ready." Because I know the rabbi, there's a tradition, right? Praiseworthy is someone who comes to heaven with his study in his hand. And I've been studying a lot my whole life, but I just want one more review before last minute cramming session. So sure enough, exactly on the 30th day, the angel of death comes back. Rav says, "Why are you so prompt? So he said, 'Come back, I'll pay you, next week.' Okay, you hope the person will come in, 2 weeks. I give you a couple of days." So Rav is like, "Angel of death, why have to be so prompt? Exactly 30 days." The answer was because Bar Natan is pushing you. He's going to be the next leader of the generation after you. And we have a rule that sovereignty of one person, like one king and the next king, or any other sovereignty, cannot overlap with its counterpart, even a hairbreadth. So as long as you're alive, you're preventing the next generation from succeeding you. So that's it. I gave you 30 days, but not a minute more. Rav Chisda Rav Chisda, it was his time to die, but the angel of death could not take him because he constantly was studying Torah and would not stop. We're never silent. That's the rule. Angel of death can't take people when they're in the middle of learning Torah. This is said regarding a few people, David HaMelech in Berachot. It's said regarding Rabbah also. So it's a whole bunch of people use this to get away from death. And so the angel of death went and sat on a cedar tree or a column, and as it was sitting on it, because of its weight, it cracked. And Rav Chisda was distracted for a moment, and in that moment he stopped learning, and the angel of death was able to take Rav Chisda. And the last story, Rabbi Chiya, angel of death could not take Rabbi Chiya because Rabbi Chiya was so righteous. So the angel of death could dress up as anybody. Often dresses up as a woman, often as poor person. And so the angel of death, disguised as a poor person, comes and knocks on the door. Says, "Please bring me some bread." Okay, now it looks like the angel of death, this is counterproductive because he's only giving Rabbi Chiya yet another merit, another mitzvah. Of course, Rabbi Chiya gave him a piece of bread. And says, "Oh, see, I knew, Rabbi Chiya, right? See how you have mercy on poor." Actually saying now the opposite. If you're so nice to poor people, how come you don't have mercy on a poor person? Meaning, if you're so nice to a physically poor person who has no bread, why don't you have mercy on me? And now he reveals himself. Galile, He revealed himself as the angel of death. And the point of the story is saying that I'm the angel of death and I need your life. I need your soul, right? That's what I've come to collect. And so just like you willingly gave of your own bread to help a poor person, you see how selfless you are, and how you care for others. Now actually I'm not a poor person. I'm the angel of death. And now I am in need, right? That is my job. I have to come to collect your life. And so therefore be selfless and time to give over your life. And so when he revealed himself, he showed this fiery rod, and that shows that's his badge, that he is in fact the angel of death. And Rabbi Chaya surrendered his life to him. A really interesting story of a friend, Rabbi Yonatan Cohen, who used the story to explain the statement that says "Tzedakah tasil mimavet," that giving charity can save one from death. Well, is that true? I mean, there's lots of people that give charity, very philanthropic, and eventually they die. So, what does that mean? What does that mean that will save from death? So based on this, it's to say that will save from the suffering of death, from the pain of it. That when someone gives tzedakah, becomes selfless, thinks about others more than himself, and because of that, he knows he lived a good life and helped people, and therefore that person's parting of life is not as difficult as for others, and kind of mita benishika. And so that's a really interesting series of stories, and how the angel of death also for himself was able to use Rabbi Chaya's own generosity against him. So I don't know what this says about the angel of death, but well, I guess that's what you could expect from his personality. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.